Hello and welcome to another episode of the All Things Considered CX podcast. I'm your host, Bob Azman, and I'm glad you're back listening to us because, as I say always, we have some fascinating guests, and today is no different from that. I have Diane Magers and Michael Hinshaw joining me today. We're going to talk about a lot of things related to CX, including their latest book. But first, I'd like to welcome them and have them introduce themselves to you, our listeners. And Diane, how about starting us off?
Of course, happy to do that. Hello, everyone. Welcome. So glad you're here with us today. We're excited to share some of our passion with you. Name is Diane Magers, and I've been in this space longer than I care to admit. I started as a lead for experience at Cisco Foods, worked at AT&T Business Solutions in the office of the customer, and in between that was also CEO for the CXPA. And I also do advising and coaching right now for consultants. And obviously, I've been authoring for the last couple of years. So happy to be here to share a little bit about that.
Great.
Michael?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. And I'll echo Diane. Glad to be here and excited to have the opportunity to chat with all of you. My background is, currently I'm founder and president of a company called McorpCX. We are a customer experience consultancy. Founded in 2002. We've never done anything but customer and employee experience. So we've done it over 20 years. And I got into that, interestingly, by being the CEO of a company in an industry I knew nothing about, in a country I knew nothing about, essentially building the largest independent grain trading company in Canada using the principles of CX. And it was in the late 90s, early 2000s that I did that, and then parlayed that into the firm that I work with now. So also teach entrepreneurship, innovation, and customer experience at UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business. A lot of connection points between those, but yeah, so a little bit about me. Thanks, Bob.
Excellent. That's great summaries of your background. So listening to your backgrounds a little bit, the thought comes to my mind is there's certainly a lot of new CX practitioners getting into the business, so to speak. With your backgrounds and the number of years you've been in the business, tell me one thing that has significantly changed. And I know there's probably 100 things that have changed, but does one thing come to mind that says, when I got in this business, it's totally different today than when I got in the business? And Michael, I'm going to start with you.
I have to say the biggest, so I used to joke that the first 10 years in this business, I had to explain what customer experience was. And the last 10 years, I have to explain what it isn't. So everything is customer experience. But when we, interact with client organizations who say, we have a customer experience consultant that's doing some work for us, it's like, great, what kind of work are they doing? Well, they're designing a mobile app for customer segment B. And it's like, that's not customer experience, but that's also not how you systematically and consistently drive CX through an organization. It's an interaction point, it's a touch point. So the biggest change that I've seen is the broad recognition of the importance and primacy of customer experience as a business discipline, but also I'll call it the diffusion of what CX is within an organization and how to actually organize to deliver great customer experiences on an ongoing basis.
Yeah.
Diane?
Yeah. I would say the complexity. I think about the days when we got started, when this is way back in the 1900s, early.
The 1900s. Okay.
Yeah, what it feels like. The thing that really is interesting now is that you have to be so much more knowledgeable about so many different things to be able to be a practitioner. And I recognize that there's a lot with technology and AI and data platforms and all the things that we've been through. That whole tech piece and data and the use and the privacy and security and all GDP, all the things that are really coming to bear now are really making this more complex. So I think if I were to say what's changed, it's been the ability for us as CX professionals to understand, guide our organization, and glue the pieces together. It used to be okay to kind of float along the top and be advising and giving all this information. But now designing takes a huge amount of lift to understand all the pieces and parts that go along with it. And that technology component has just made it not more complex. It's good enablers, but it's a lot more to think about. So the complexity, I think, is the biggest thing I've seen change.
Mm-hmm. So Diane, along those lines of technology, you know, big data, data collection, data analysis, we hear all about that, AI, just all the things that you talked about. But one of the things that I read about, I hear about, I experience with organizations is, man, we collect a lot of data, but I don't hear a lot of action, or I don't hear a lot of analysis from the data. But boy, we're good at collecting data. We're surveying our customers. We're gathering the voice of the customer. We're doing, that's all fantastic.
Yeah.
What are you seeing? Are you, certainly companies are surveying and collecting data, but are they doing stuff with it? Are they using the technology?
Data rich, insights poor. That has not changed. And I think the insights to action motion that many organizations are missing, it's because it doesn't really belong to anyone, or people don't have the skills. If we think about it's great to get information, it's great to get data, but if you're not going to do anything with it, then don't do it. Like spending all this time and energy and effort on things that don't really matter and you're not going to use anyway is wasting everybody's time. So being diligent and specific about what data you're collecting, but also upskilling your organization to say, so what? We know we have an opportunity, but people are very quick to go to the knee-jerk reaction and just go fix something. As we know, in experience management, stopping and really sitting with the problem for a while and looking at alternatives of what you should do, weighing that and the impact of what you could do, getting to the right insight, that aha moment you should have about what you should go do, and then building, launching, and measuring that process is kind of missing today. Right now, it's just, hey, we're going to send information out and let people go do their own thing. We're only feeding the fire of people working in silos. So if we don't get that structure down and get the information out to the right people, help them use it the right way, you're right, it's all for naught.
Michael, thoughts?
Yeah, I echo what Diane said. I don't think we work with any organization that doesn't gather tons of information, and only a handful do something not just intelligent with it. Because many organizations will take individual data points and, to Diane's point, fix a thing, but the ability to kind of systematically, consistently ingest that data, do something intelligent with it in terms of figuring out what's the right problem to solve, and then going and actually solving that problem in ways that positively affect customer and employee experiences. That motion, that muscle is pretty undeveloped in most organizations. Much less the ability to, once you've used the information to improve the experience, come back around and see how well you actually did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we used to do ROIs for our CFOs, and once we get the money for the investment, not necessarily CX, but just buying a new piece of software or new equipment, they'd always say, now we want to see a report on the ROI results in the next year. And funny, we never had to do those reports. We got the money, but we never had to do the report. So
yep, it's in the budget.
Right, exactly, right. So a few minutes ago, you talked about the most significant changes. Michael, you said you had to explain what it is and then what it isn't. And Diane, you talked about the complexity that we've seen. What do you think, as we look at today, is the state of CX as you see it, either talking to colleagues or organizations that you work with, or feedback you got on the book? What's the state of CX? Michael, I'll go to you first on that.
Yeah, I think, and Diane and I were at the CXPA, a CXPA event in Denver together recently, and somebody described CX as essentially being a teenager as an industry, right? So certainly no longer toddler, we're past toddler stage, but we're definitely not in adulthood yet. You think about, other disciplines, marketing, finance, those are well into adulthood, or well into adulthood in some of those cases. But there's a lot of, I'll use the word angst here amongst practitioners, and also on the side, of CEOs and organizational leaders. It's like, how do I track the value of this? And that's the biggest thing that I see with the CX practitioners is that actually, so we did a survey recently asking about kind of capabilities. I'm going to get these numbers. So one of the things my background is in marketing, and I have a master's in design. So when I talk about numbers, I'm always directionally correct, but I'm rarely entirely accurate. So, so we did a survey of CX practitioners globally. I think we had about 280 respondents to it. And when I saw the results of it, I said, these two numbers told the story of customer experience today. And one number was, articulate and stack rank the biggest issues you have as a CX practitioner driving customer experience inside your organizations. And I think number one was executive attention, right? Getting the time with executives. Number two was resources and budget. And then, so, time and attention, resources and budget. And then another question we asked in that same survey was, to what degree are you able to articulate the value of what you've delivered as a CX leader in the last 12 months? And 10% were able to say, absolutely, we can articulate this. Mm-hmm. So as I see about what's happening in the CX industry, it's like, okay, well, the reason you're not getting executive attention and resources is because you can't link what you're doing to value. And so we see kind of two things happening. One being that there's one group of customer experience practitioners, professionals, leaders that are having a hard time in their organizations, and they tend to be focused on, more consistently focused on softer things. But there's another huge cohort, maybe equal in size, maybe greater, that's actually ascending up into the C-suite, and in some cases, HubSpot, for example, into the CEO role of the organization. And you think about the ability of a customer experience leader to look across an organization and see where to drive value. And I know the word value and ROI and those things are bandied about a lot, but the reality is that CX leaders who do show value, who do see how to connect the dots, are rising up in the organization, and those who don't are not.
So, Dan, before I go to you, Michael, I can relate a little bit of a story here because my other hat is I teach supply chain and operations, and a little over 4.5 years ago, most CEOs didn't know what a supply chain was. They knew that there was a purchasing department somewhere in the basement or a procurement manager that got things bought, and they knew product was produced, but CEOs didn't even know what a supply chain was. And I'm exaggerating a little bit for effect, but there's plenty of truth in that exaggeration. But and then the pandemic hit in March of 2020, and suddenly you didn't have to explain supply chain anymore when you went to a cocktail party because everybody knew what a supply chain was or wasn't, so to speak. Yeah. So Diane, long-winded introduction to the question for you is, that's a burning platform that completely changed supply chain forever. And everybody knows about it. It's now one of the hottest disciplines for advanced degrees in the country. Is supply chain managers are desperately needed, lack of talent. Does customer experience need a burning platform to get the attention of the CEOs?
Oh, we have one. We don't need one. We have one. We have the burning platform. To me, the not being able to tell the business case story, but we're also not baking it into what we do every day. What I think happens when you talk to leadership is they all nod their head that yes, this is important, and yes, it's on our goals, and yes, we need to be doing it, but they don't really understand operationally, financially, or from a culture perspective, what it's actually going to take to do it. And so there was a bit of a gap, and I call it a little bit of the poor me in customer experience, saying my leaders don't listen to me, or I can't get the money, or I never have funding, or I'm afraid my role's going to get cut. And I kind of say, it's up to you to help those leaders understand it. You've got to take them aside, and they're going to nod their head, and they're very proud that they are leading the organization, but they need to know what this is, to your point about supply chain. And they have to understand what it means when you actually get it embedded into the way the organization works, how you make decisions, how you use that data, how you put dollars against the investment, and you show the investment coming out the other end, right? Of, you gave us this much money, here's what I gave you back for it. And not only that, but I gave you this, because we have such an opportunity to tell those stories. And we're just missing the opportunity to actually show them what it looks like when it's done well. And that's what you talk to leaders who are arising in the organization, who have these very strong practices. It's because they've taken the time to bring the leadership along. They put it into that every day, this is what we're going to do and how we're going to make decisions. They've built it in, which was part of the reason we wrote the book we're going to talk about, is to do exactly that. So when I say the burning platform is, you've got to make this just part of the way the organization works. We can't float along and try to influence here and there. We've got to bake it in.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to jump on
Please.
that a little bit, add to that. So Diane's perspective on what practitioners need to do in organizations to drive it 100% in alignment. But if we look at when CEOs public companies present to analysts, right? Investor days, annual report, et cetera, they tend not to talk about things that don't directly link to value, right? So the things that CEOs talk to analysts about are important. And if you look at the number of mentions of the phrase customer experience, I think in the early 2000s, it wasn't mentioned at all. About 10 years ago, it started, 5, 10 a quarter, something like that. I think the most recent is nearly 500 mentions on earnings calls by CEOs of the primacy of customer experience. So plenty of organizations are seeing this. I don't think we necessarily need, nor do I see a blockbuster Kodak moment coming up in our industry. I think that the things that are falling apart are doing so slowly and then all at once. There's a reason that the S&P 500 is churning at a significantly faster rate than it ever has before, because companies are dropping out. They're not moving fast enough. I don't know if that linkage is necessarily direct and quantified, but there's recognition that customer experience is important among a significant group of CEOs. Mm-hmm. And they tend to link that to value if they're going to be talking about it.
Right. Spot on there. A couple of I promise we're going to get to the book, but this is so fascinating.
Conversation.
Right? So an episode or so ago, Marshall Goldsmith joined me, and he is part of what I call the adjacent series. So he's not a CX practitioner per se, but he's in leadership development and coaching, and that's so important to us as practitioners. And I said to him, what's your advice for CX professionals? And he said, you better, I'm going to paraphrase, but you better darn well know how to sell, or you're not going to be successful at all. We're all salespeople. Reaction to that?
Mm-hmm.
Diane?
Short answer is yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right?
And selling was about making it relevant to the goals of the organization and the strategic intent that the leadership had and what they were trying to accomplish. So talking our language, Greg Tucker and I affectionately named it CX speak to C-suite speak, because we're not talking, when you talk about NPS and you talk about effort score, they're like, they're nodding. But when you start talking about profitability, when you start talking about margins, when you start talking about effectiveness of their sales team or productivity of the employees, they go, oh, you're going to help us do that. Yeah. So when it's selling, it's really about creating that value for them and seeing how what we can do ties to where the organization is headed. It's not a lag behind. It's not we're coming back and telling you Net Promoter did this or this. That's important to gauge where you are, but it's too late at that point, right? It's a lagging indicator. And so we have to get more in front, and we have to be more proactive and show them the impact it can have so we can help them plan. One of the things that we talk about as an example of really working that together is CX teams do not work with the business units to build a strategy for the year. Why not? We're going to influence and help them. Why wouldn't we be a part of that? Pointing out, if you're trying to do this, here's how we can help with changing the experience. We're not embedding ourselves enough in that conversation to be able to influence it. We're a little bit of the tail of the dog at this point, and that we need to be leading, have the lead for the dog, right? The leash, pulling him along. So I think it's that language that we use and the way that we present ourselves, and we're here to help the organization grow and learn and achieve their goals that they're after and organizations after, which is why they can talk about it in the earnings call.
Yeah, I'd say there's an irony in this. Yes, sales, but sales to the degree that sales is about communicating things that are important to your audience. And I say there's irony because when we talk about customer experience, we all talk about the importance of personalization. We all talk about the importance of having things be relevant to our customers. Well, if you flip that around internally, if you personalize your messages to your internal audiences and you make them relevant to those internal audiences, is that selling or is that just delivering customer experience internally? Whatever it is, if you do a good job at it, the chances are you're going to get attention and resources to do your job.
I used to call it the dirty dozen when I have something I wanted to go talk to the executives about because I had 12 executives. This is gonna seem strange, but typically there was the 12 executives and there were 12 different versions of the way we needed to share the information because everybody was listening differently, right? The 13th, the dirty dozen, was the board. How the board understands this, if you have a board, you may not, but the governing body of your organization, whether it's stakeholders or your board, also has to understand where this is headed. Because I hear a lot of organizations say our board is pushing us to do this, but the leadership is like, I'm not sure how. And then they look to the practitioner, and the practitioner doesn't know how. It's like, yeah, we're in a pickle now because you really don't have somebody who knows and has learned and understands what they need to do next to really drive this. That's where it comes into, you got to learn how to make it work as a practitioner to deliver on that. So to Michael's point, how you talk to people is a different version for everyone. You feel like times.
Well, one of the ways I bet we could help practitioners through this process is if they read a book. And I understand that the two of you collaborated on a book called Experience Rules. So let's get into it with our remaining time. And Michael, I'll start with you and tell me a little bit about the why behind the book. What prompted the two of you to collaborate and write this book?
Yeah, so all the things that we've been chatting about so far, I think go into this in terms of the why. The name of the book is Experience Rules, and the subtitle is the Experience Operating System, or we call it XOS, and 8 keys to enable it. And the reason that we call it that is that there's general awareness of things that need to be done by CX professionals, right? We need a strategy, we need a vision, we need to understand our customers better, we need to be able to design and innovate around experiences, but we need to measure, et cetera, right? You need to have technology and data and all those components in place. But how those things work together systematically in ways that help the organization see the value of what you do, that is a piece that Diane and I both saw was missing. And we're being asked, both by clients and by peers and others in organizations that we interact with. It's like, how do I explain this? How do I make this stuff work together? How do I institutionalize the ability to work across the organization? And we wanted to write a book that gave the tools and the framework within which organizations could do that, led by passionate practitioners.
Outstanding. Diane, what were some of the learnings you had in the process of writing the book when you started the collaboration with Michael?
Thinking through, in my mind, it was not so much about writing the book and espousing things, because that's not really what we knew our audience wanted. It was more of, we need to go out and really understand what those challenges are today. We need to talk to people who have, fought the fight and who are still fighting the fight, and understand where those gaps are. Because when we wrote the book and began to realize the things like we talked about at the beginning, that leadership may or may not understand it enough to really get behind it, that this was something that was also for leaders, C-suite, and leaders in the organization, to help them understand why it's important, what it is, how to do it, questions to ask, actions to take, barriers. All of that is in the 8 keys that we talk about, those pieces that fit together to operationalize it. That's how we structured those chapters, because we wanted it to be very simple and straightforward about, here's things to think about, and here's the actions you should take. And all those pieces kind of fit together. So that was one learning. The second was we set out, as we were writing it and talking about this approach. The other thing that we said is, it seems like it's a shift. It's a shift in we've been doing the same thing for a long time. And yes, it's gotten more complex, and yes, it's harder. But what we need to really be thinking about is how do we take, if we're focused on net promoter score, and that's been great, but what's next? We think that the experience operating system is how you really build it into the everyday, and how you bring those pieces together and make it just part of your ways of working, and how you make decisions and how you use data, to your point. So that was a learn too, that I don't think at the very beginning we had that in our mind. That was what was going to be. But the more people that read it, they say, oh my gosh, yeah, this is where we need to go. We really need to make this part of just, you have an HR department, you have this department too, but they're embedded into everything that we do every day. And they're making sure we're staying on track and being able to innovate around those things as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mentioned this earlier, and Diane just mentioned it, right? There's other disciplines that inside every organization that aren't necessarily P&L driven, finance, legal, HR, for example. And there's a body of knowledge around which everyone organizes, right? There's ways to track a balance sheet, right? There's things that you need to do as an HR professional to manage the acquisition or hiring and offboarding of employees. That kind of codified knowledge, I'll call it, doesn't really exist for CX. There's a lot out there about it, and so what I saw our role as, or mine, is in kind of bringing some of those things together into a format that we put together ourselves, and then validated pretty heavily with others that we worked with, to make sure that we weren't bringing our personal perspectives alone into the process to create that. I'll call it a manual. I mean, we've had people call it, after reading it, this is a great manual, this is a guidebook, this is something that I refer back to, which is something that I'm pretty excited about, and not something that I anticipated, to be perfectly honest.
Mm-hmm.
We had a gentleman who contacted us who wanted us to come and talk about the book, and he literally held it up, and there was just all these Post-it notes kind of
Right.
It's like, that's exactly what we wanted, though, because we feel like as a practitioner, when I talked about the complexity, it's hard to learn all of these things. It's a lot. You have to be a generalist, but you have to be a specialist at certain times in almost everything. And so the ability for people to see where, hey, I recognize that as a gap my organization has, I need to do something about that, was exactly what we wanted. Exactly to lead people down the path of, what should I do next? I feel like I'm stuck. And that's what we heard a lot in the last year. We've heard a lot of, how come I'm not getting the funding? How come I'm not getting resources?
Mm-hmm.
What do I need to be doing differently? So that was our key takeaway. Thanks
Mm-hmm.
for that, Michael. That was a great addition.
So listeners, just as a side note, before we started taping, Michael and I were kind of sharing a little bit of our background to get to know one another. And Michael said he's in innovativeness and entrepreneurship, and I'm in operations, and neither of us knew about the other disciplines. Kind of like, wow, those are totally opposite. And what I didn't have a chance to share with Michael is, when I saw the operating system, I said, well, wait a minute, operating system, that's what operations is built on, is an operating system. And we would characterize it as systems thinking. That is, all business is a process. There's a series of inputs that are transformed into a series of outcomes. And so when I looked at the wheel, and you grab the book and read it, you'll see what I'm referring to. I called it the wheel. I hope I'm not offending the authors by calling it the wheel. But when I saw the wheel, that's exactly what I said, was this is systems thinking in operations speak. Am I characterizing that appropriately, or would you deviate from that and tell me, no, you're wrong there? What are your thoughts there, Michael?
Spot on. And I think that's one of the things, which neither Diane nor I said this directly, but there is not yet a system around CX. And we felt the need to create, or at least codify, knowledge to put it in the context of a system, and systems thinking was an organizing principle of ours as we went through this.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Diane, remember the times that people would come to the CXPA and say, hey, the CEO just told me I'm the head of CX because I did really good on a project over there on IT. And so I must be really good at CX. Now what do I do? Right?
Yes, exactly. I can't tell you how many people have said, I wish this book was around when I started, because it would have given me the blueprint for what I needed to do and what I needed to know, and how to lead my leaders along. Because if you read it from the leader's perspective and you look at those questions, if I was a leader and I didn't know anything about it, I'd be going and asking my people, not just my CX team, but really everybody in the organization, because it really does belong to everyone. They need to own it. They need to understand it in order for you to make progress. All of us have had those conversations where the light bulb finally goes on and people go, oh, that's what it is. Okay, now I can get on board, whether that's the value conversation or not. It depends. But that's where we wanted it to go. And so I think, to your point, having that, oh, this is systems thinking, how do I apply that there, is exactly the type of takeaway we want. The shift in behavior or the framework of how you've been approaching it so far. It can be different.
Mm-hmm. I used to characterize it a little bit like learning a new language. You know, the experts say you don't really know a new language until you stop translating your native language into the new language. So if you're constantly in your mind, let's just say English to Spanish, if I'm constantly translating it first and then speaking it, I don't really know the language. But once I'm able to just fluently speak it, the new language, whatever that is, that's truly kind of embedding it into my psyche and my knowledge base. And I think that's what you two are talking about with this book, is it's time to embed it in the way we do business.
Yes,
Absolutely.
exactly.
Yeah.
Wow, our time goes so fast. We could probably talk another hour at least about this. Let's finalize the book discussion and just say I'm sure it's available on all the major platforms, Amazon and the like.
Yes.
And so, readers, I encourage you to go out and grab this book and really dive into it, because I think you will really find it fascinating. Before I leave the two of you to go do your regular jobs, where are we headed in CX? What's the next, year going to hold for us? What's your crystal ball say is happening in the world of CX these days? And Michael, I'll start with you.
Yeah. So within the next year, I don't know that I have a high level of confidence that a lot is going to change. Because there's a lot of other things happening in the world that are driving other conversations, as I'm sure we're all hyper aware. But I think over the long run with CX, it really is moving. How does CX as a business discipline move out of the teen years? Really get to a point where we are as a profession, not just some group of CX professionals that can speak to the C-suite in ways that matter to the C-suite, that can actually be part of the C-suite. How does CX as a profession just end up with a leadership seat at the table as part of what we do, because CX has that level of recognized value? And that's going to be that value conversation. You need to be able to show why CX is important. And I see there's a lot of movement towards that, but there's still a lot of angst and uncertainty around it. So my aspirational hope is that people in this discipline are going to be able to start understanding how to link what we do to the careabouts of executive leaders and to the what's in it for me's, right? The WIFMs of everyone across the organization. Because unless you have that top level recognition of CX, as well as a line employee ability to translate customer experience and things that are meaningful to them, it's going to be difficult to move the organization forward.
Excellent.
There's probably more projection than where I think it's going to go, but I believe that we're moving more toward a experience management approach, meaning employee experience, partner, the ecosystem that everybody works in, the way businesses are part of an ecosystem today, I think is going to shift. Supply chains are collapsing and they're connecting. Lots of things are happening to really care for that. So I think our profession will go more toward experience management, where it's employee, customer, partner. I think if we don't figure out what we learned from social media, the launch of the internet and all that around AI, and we don't really design those experiences appropriately, I think AI may begin to have its own life a little bit. We need to be able to harness that appropriately. The last thing that I'll say is I think, and both of you know me well enough to know this is not going to surprise you, that I think the purpose and sustainability and humanity that we're missing now from experience, we talk about it as a discipline, but we as human beings every day have these non-connectors now that are happening with companies where it's like all digital, but I don't have a way to really connect to the purpose or value of that company. Therefore, I'm going to leave. I think that's going to come around to talk about how companies come together to provide better experiences, how they come together to solve some of the bigger problems we have, climate change, for example. We've got to move there. And I think experienced professionals are bringing that humanity to organizations, and that needs to continue.
Yeah, there's one very quick thing I'll add to that. Bob, you mentioned you called it the wheel, kind of organizes the 8 keys that we talked about. In the center of that wheel, there's a reason the human is in the center.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You know, it harkens back to the days of Michael Hammer and process reengineering, where we all jumped on that bandwagon, and then and we all said to ourselves, you know, we're the people in this, right? What's
Right.
And then 2 years later, Michael Hammer came back and said, oh yeah, you got to remember there's people in there. You got to remember there's a human. Oh, thanks. We got that, Michael. So I appreciate both of you so much. Listeners, Michael and Diane, authors of Experience Rules, the Experience Operating System, as well as experienced experience management professionals. So we're really happy you joined us. Thank you both.
Thanks,
Thank
Bob.
you, Bob.
Appreciate
Absolute
it.
pleasure.
And hello to everyone. If you have questions or after you read the book, we'd love to hear your feedback.
Yes, thank you, Diane.
Yes, of course.
We're easy to find.
Absolutely, on LinkedIn, totally, and they're very responsive too. So keep that in mind. Thanks for that offer. So listeners, this has been another episode of the All Things Considered CX podcast, part of the CXFM radio network at Michigan State University. We thank you for joining us. And as always, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your networks and stay tuned for another episode in the near future.
Great.